Live from New Orleans.
It's Saturday night.
Let's roll.
It's Friday night. It's Friday night.
I like it. So we're about to begin, to your chagrin. Let's give you some background as to why this is happening.
So I really appreciate everybody that is here. I am Robin Webb, and I'm at the Physical Sciences Division in Boulder, Colorado. This, to me, is an interesting session that we're pulling off. About 23 months ago, I was sitting across the street with a good friend, Kelly Redmond, and we were talking about his bucket list. And on Kelly's bucket list of things he wanted to do while he still had time was to hold a session. And the session was on the use of humor in the communication of geophysical science. And we're doing it. We're doing it for Kelly. We didn't do it fast enough to do it with Kelly. But what I'd like to point out is that Kelly gets all the credit, and Roger Pulwarty and I get all the blame. So just a couple of things that are, let's see if we can do this. I think I know how to do it. Is it? Is it coming up, or am I not able? So I'm showing my technical capabilities. Fascinating. There it is. All right. So we're pretty good now. This is just to show that comedy is easy to deal with. So one of the things in comedy that people do often and is done well is you always have to quote Groucho Marx and Mark Twain, and I felt it was appropriate to put a couple of quotes in there. John Cleese, I was really sort of, I liked his quote, if I can persuade you to laugh at a particular point that I make, by laughing you acknowledge it as true. Something interesting and insightful from a true legend in the theory of communication. There's also interesting articles out there, putting the ha in aha. And this is Brandy Reese, and I thought that was a very useful and interesting sort of quote. And then this, there was a blog post by Tyler Berringen, and that was earlier last month, so it was mid-November. And the key takeaway about humor there is that the right amount of humor, however, entices the flavor of the message, making it not only easier to ingest, but pleasurable to do so. So with that, I'd like to open up the session with Roger Pulwarty just giving a little preview.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. And let's see where this goes. Thanks for taking the time. We have a stellar lineup of speakers who have been skilled enough and credible enough as scientists to join us in this extremely important endeavor, which is the role of humor in thinking through our systems. Where's the
mouse?
Yeah, let's see if that works.
Try that one.
Oh, is that one? Let's use the one that works. All right. This is the very first intentional AGU session on the use of humor in the communication of sciences. I remember we held the meeting here at the AMS after Katrina, and in one of the talks I gave, I noted that the amount of suffering that had taken place here, and the meeting had only been 2 days old. So there were a lot of talks that we lived through. So we're going to speak a little bit in the next couple minutes and then introduce the speakers to this idea of how we treat different notions of the world and the humor that it brings to us and the insight that it brings. One of the masters of this was Kelly Redmond. And Kelly always reminded me, and that's why I put that little note there, change is ahead. You don't need to be the Dalai Lama to know that the future is about change. But he always had a little envelope. He says, no matter how far you push the envelope, it's still stationary. For those of you youngsters, an envelope is something we used to put our tweets in when we wrote prose, and prose is language that goes from one paragraph to the next. So as we speak through this, and you hear the speakers, we look for the humor and the insight, a unique group of people who can bring humor to key questions and help us provide some answers. I always like to say the human mind is so amazing that you give us a complex problem, sooner or later we'll solve it. It's the obvious that takes us forever, and humor brings out the obvious in the way we think. So let's think through this. I'm going to use one quote, one bit of seriousness in this session, and it was written when Kelly passed away last year. He says, "In these days where views of climate change have led to sharp and often destructive divisions among many of us, Kelly stood above the fray, offering level-headed insight to all through his unassuming, unpretentious demeanor. He and I published together, keeping a clear eye on the observations, even though interpretations might have been a little different. He recognized the importance of actively engaging those whom he felt were honestly approaching the problem, and with that Kelly-esque wit, which we're celebrating right now, building relationships in the process that would allow the open and free dialogue we see so little of today, and the dialogue for which our scientific souls yearn from both mind and heart. Thank you, Kelly. And you're going to find in our session people that embody that sort of spirit. Kelly loved this book by Douglas Hofstadter, which said, "Analogy is everything," because he used historical analogies to explain what he was doing. Or very nearly so, in my view. Kelly's rejoinder was, "or something like that." Very importantly, we need to remember about Kelly Redmond was that Kelly was into data before it was big. You know? Now it's all big data. He had another little bit of humor that he used to like. He says, "Anybody know what's the difference between, what do you get when you cross a mountain climber and a mosquito? You can't. One is a scalar and one's a vector." So the idea, as we think through this, I'm going to give you, from a talk that Kelly gave, just a few snippets. He gave the Tyndall lecture in 2014 at the AGU. It says, "Science does not stop in the classroom, journal, or conference room. It follows you everywhere. There are no bounds of inquiry, limits to inquiry. Try to be accurate and precise." And he knew the difference between being precise and accurate. "Read good writers and explainers, lots of them. Practice, practice, and when you're done, practice. Maintain awareness of, be suspicious of buying into conventional modes of thought." One of his favorite writers, the physicist Richard Feynman, "The easiest person to fool is yourself." Most often, and this is a quote from Kelly, all of this, except in this, most often, less is more, except in this comment, which runs on and on and on and on and on. "And be a skeptic about everything, including this list." That was one of the things, and you'll hear today, people are very reflective and are willing to critique their own works and not simply accept received models. So, and now for something completely different. We're going to get engaged in our session. I've put the names in red just to highlight, again, the people who have put their credibility on the line here. "Time to quit my day job" from Josh. "A spoonful of humor" from Cecile. A hashtag from Gavin. We then go to an amazing title, "The Hammer of the Gods. Once and Future Battles of Thor and the Midgard Serpent." "The Failing of the Bifrost." "The Imperative of Humor in the Portfolio of Communication Strategies." And Richard will be the person giving that, and we'll end with a few closing thoughts. So thank you for helping us celebrate the role of humor in the communication of geosciences.
So first talk up is going to be Josh, and I'm going to search and try to figure out which of these we have. Yeah, there it is. This is actually fired away. Good luck. Hit a button, maybe. Let's try that one.
Yes, it worked.
No, it didn't.
It did. The first slide is blank.
Oh, good.
It's okay. I've never seen such a huge crowd at an AGU thing before. How you guys doing tonight? Yeah, all right. What do you think about this this 4 to 6 on Friday time slot, huh? It's okay though. It's okay though. We're all scientists, so we're really funny. All right. So the title of this talk, "Time to Quit My Day Job." So I'll just pose that question at the beginning, and you guys can all tell me that I should have quit my day job a long time ago at the end of it. All right, so this is a little bit of a walk through my history with telling jokes and doing science, both. And they kind of collided a few years ago, but I've been doing, I realized when I started getting ready for this talk that I've been doing science jokes for a really long time. And it started when I was in graduate school. I had a reading class with one of my professors, actually my advisor, Dean Remick. And he made us read papers and we'd have to get up and talk. And so it was kind of boring. So every time I did it, I would always put a Far Side cartoon into the middle of my talk, kind of randomly just to break things up. And then one day I hit upon this kind of fun idea that this was when I was in grad school. My shoes still look like that, by the way. That maybe the joke could actually kind of make sense for the talk. And I was giving a talk about the Florida current and how they measure it. And they use this cable and they measure the voltage on across the cable, and it's related to the current because the water is a conductor and it flows over it, et cetera, et cetera. And then I showed this and said, you know, with the caption, you guys remember this one, Bob, you fool, don't plug that thing in. It really, it kind of stuck, and I always remembered how the Florida current was measured after that. And I sort of realized that maybe this could actually be a tool for communicating not just with the public about science, but with my fellow scientists as well. And then, let's see, what's my next slide? Yeah, the very first time I ever told a joke at an AGU meeting, it was this one. And I put up this slide. I said, what causes global warming? And then I went to the next one, and it was this one. And this is what I heard. And so it totally bombed. And I didn't really understand why, because I thought it was hilarious. But it was right in the middle of my talk, and I realized that I had been giving this talk, and it was very technical, and everybody was following along. And then I tried to tell a joke, and it had no context. There was no room for people to laugh at that point. And I'm just going to take this down before Al Gore finds out about it. Too late, I know. It's on YouTube now, buddy. But a few years back, I was actually on a cruise with my wife. Not a science cruise. It was one of these kinds of cruises. They had a Second City troupe. And we watched them perform, and one night the director was there, and he was a guy named Matt Craig. This is him. And I found him after the show, and I started talking to him, and I said, I'm a scientist, I'm a climate scientist, and I'm in desperate need of comedic assistance. I want to make global warming funny. And he gave me his card and told me to, when I got back to Los Angeles, to go here and start taking improv classes at the Second City Hollywood School of Improv. And I did that, and it was really cool because later on this guy actually became the lead story editor for the new Bugs Bunny reboot called Wabbit, and now he's the lead story editor for Looney Tunes. So I have all these friends that have written new Looney Tunes cartoons. So he's a very funny guy. And I did. I went there and I started taking classes, and I actually went through the curriculum. It was about 2 years long, and I got a certificate of graduation, which is on my wall right next to my PhD, a little higher. But it was an amazing experience, and I learned a lot about trying to be funny and stand up and talk to people. And I also met this woman, Rainey O'Brien, and we wrote a show together. She was interested in climate change. The show was called The Lollygaggers. And it had puppets and big characters. There was a polar bear whose home had melted, and a grizzly bear whose home burned down, and they had to move in together, and they were roommates, kind of like an odd couple roommate situation. And I played a carbon atom. I went into a coffee shop, cruising around looking for a couple of oxygen molecules to bond with, and of course, it ended with me becoming CO2 and flying off into the atmosphere to cause global warming for 1,000 years. So this was a really fun way to kind of blend my love of both humor and science, and really kind of try and tell the story in a way that was very relatable. It was a lot of fun. We did it for a couple years on Hollywood Boulevard in Hollywood on Saturday afternoons. It had about a 4-month run. If you ever want to see a reboot of it, good luck. Call me. But I continued on with my, I learned a lot from Second City and going through the classes there, and I've begun to kind of try and deploy that not just when I'm giving science talks and not just when I'm performing on stage, but also when I talk to the media. So a few years ago, I meant to get the video, but I didn't get it in time for this talk. It's out there somewhere, but I was doing an interview on KTLA, one of the local LA stations, and they asked me, they said, it was a live interview, I was on the studio, they said, what happens, when people say global warming's not real? How do you feel about it? How do you deal with that? And I said, well, you can look to places like Antarctica, where the ice shelves are collapsing. And what's interesting is that these ice shelves are been around for more than 10,000 years, which means that they're the only thing older than Hugh Hefner to break up in the last 100. The news anchors looked at me in this shocked faces. They couldn't believe that a scientist had told a joke on the news. And then the whole rest of the story was about me telling a joke. But anyway, it was interesting because I think it really stuck with them. They invited me back and so forth, and we built a little bit of a relationship. And I think it is a good way to engage people but it does take practice. One of the things that I did was I developed a story that was a true story about me doing a climate science lecture in front of a large room of deniers. These were oil men and so forth. And it went horribly wrong, and so I invented a fictional character named Guy Scientist to tell the story. It sounded something like this. Yeah, I used to be an ordinary guy, just a regular Joe named Josh Willis. But now, I'm Guy Scientist. If you want to hear the rest of it, that's what it sounds like. You can look me up, Google Josh Willis, Guy Scientist, you'll find it. Anyway, it's hilarious, I promise. Much better than my performance there. But anyway, it was a fun way to blend a true story and a little bit of theatrical performance, and I think it's fun. Check it out. So now what I'm going to do is show you a couple of videos, because I've also sort of taken up a little self-career of making videos. And I think one of the most important things about doing comedy as a scientist is to be able to make fun of yourself. And so sometimes we are the butt of our own jokes, and that's really, I think, when we reach people the best. And sometimes the science is the joke, which is sort of what happened here. So this was a video that I made after we launched the Jason 3 spacecraft last January. It's a little footage from the launch. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's hope the sound works. I actually said that. Yeah, so that one's also on my YouTube channel. Go like it if you want to try and get me fired. But in addition to that, I've tried to do things that are a little more science communication based. And so recently, after this mission that I'm leading called Oceans Melting Greenland, or OMG for short, yes, I did come up with that acronym in an improv class. I invented a character to help kind of tell me the story of what we were doing, tell the story of what we were doing on OMG. This is a little video about that character. There's also a couple of these on my YouTube channel. You guys should really subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's fun. See if we can get this to work. All right. So there we go. You can find a few more of those also on the YouTube page. But all of this kind of culminated this year. Recently, I made another video with a friend that he actually was a friend from Second City, and he went to work making videos for Fusion Video, and he put together this video. So I can't take credit for this script, but I did help him with the writing a little bit and so forth, and I hope you enjoy this one too. This one doesn't have captions, sadly. So there you go. All right, I'm out of time, but I'm also out of slides, so it's a good deal. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for questions. A remarkable start to this session.
Thank you.
And so, you look, they're speechless.
Too busy laughing. Question?
Well, we're on a schedule, remember? Humor guy.
So,
we do have a question.
oh yeah.
And we have a mic up here, so since it's being recorded, if you don't mind.
Hi. Yeah, when you look at science communication, especially with like the comedians around, like on television, a lot of times what they're saying is also like kind of like a skewed truth. Do you have any comments on that?
I mean, yeah, I think it's part of our responsibility in the science community to help people be accurate. But it's not like being absolutely perfectly accurate is not the only goal here. We also have to reach people too. And so I think it's true, like some of the science communicators and some of the comedians occasionally stray away from exactly the most recent science. But I think it's still important that they're out there talking about it, and that they get most of it right. I think, and I think a lot of them make a solid effort to get the facts right, which is good. But nobody's 100% accurate all the time, except what I just said right there. That was accurate. Should we go? Or yeah, okay.
So you might agree that Oscar Wilde was right when he said, if you're going to tell people the truth, make them laugh or they'll kill you.
Are you threatening me?
What do you think of the idea of having flash mobs on climate change at AGU meetings where we go into the airport with our luggage of CO2 and have a little discourse? And
I love it. I mean, I think the more we do kind of wild, crazy things and show ourselves to be people who enjoy having fun, the more we reach, the larger an audience we reach, and the more diverse an audience we reach. I think we're pretty good at reaching folks who already believe us, and broadening our horizons is a great idea, and those are excellent ways to do it. Should we go on? Right.
Okay. Thank you. So our next talk is going to be by Cecile Penland, and it's A Spoonful of Humor Makes the Math Go Down. Cecile, please come up. I'll get your...
Thank you for coming. I really miss Kelly. You can't imagine how I miss that guy. And the last time I was in New Orleans he was here, and so it's sort of bittersweet being back, and he's not here. But one thing I have to say is that Kelly knew his audience, and the audience I'm going to be addressing is not the general public per se, but the problem is that although we mostly agree as scientists, there are some disagreements. And so I would like to discuss how humor can help in ameliorating the disagreements among scientists, in particular in the importance of math. Kelly knew his math. He knew it right, left, and center, and it was a delight to talk about some of the abstract things that would happen and see how abstract concepts could describe natural variability. How do I let this go? Okay. So one of the things we both hated was this statement. I'm really sorry for all the equations on this slide. I mean, if I have a student who says that, he's failed. He can find another advisor, he can find another committee member. He is not going to get me to encourage this kind of behavior because it reinforces the stereotype that math is something difficult and distasteful, or even worse, it's an indirect boast. I know what all these equations are, but I don't expect you to. The alternative is to use humor to show that the equations aren't scary, and I'm going to do that now. Because there's this concept in mathematics which is applicable to climate called the Levy process, and it's one of the more abstract concepts that there is. I mean, it has no closed form solution most of the time. It has power law tails. A lot of the moments may not exist, sometimes even the mean. However, there's a very important simplification of every Levy process that exists, and that's called the Loving Ito Decomposition, all right? And what it consists of is This is the increment of a levy process, and it has the tangent linear term. It has a Gaussian white noise term. That is, it's a Gaussian noise with a variance equal to the time step of your model if you're doing it in a model, or to the dt of whatever it is. And it has a compound Poisson process, which is very close to the regular Poisson processes that we know and love, and that Josh was using in his talks. Well, you may not remember this decomposition, but you may remember this. And what we have here is we have Norbert Wiener, who came up with the properties of a Wiener process. We have Dennis Poisson, and when you make them, you get the work of Levy, Paul Levy. Okay? So what this does is they say, what a bizarre thing, and they may not even remember everything, but they will remember this picture. Now, I have to say that I always request posters because, number one, you can get away with a lot more with posters than you can in a talk, believe me. And number two, only the people who are really interested will stop by and talk to you, so you don't have to waste your time boring people if they don't care about your math. And it's just a great way to get science communicated to your colleagues. So this is what the poster looks like from a distance. You see it has the equations, it has the graphs, and it has that family portrait. And I should apologize to John Brewster and his portrait of the Morgan family that I completely corrupted. Now, sometimes you may want to tell a story complete with heroes and villains in order to make a complicated point. And one of the things that is very au courant in global climate modeling these days is the concept of stochastic parameterizations of subgrid scale processes. What that means is that you use random numbers to insert the variability into a model of things that the model can't see. Okay, the grid space is too big, the time step is too big, whatever. And believe it or not, you can replace them with random numbers, and it not only improves the forecasts, it improves the forecasts. So this is an example of one that I showed Lo these many years ago. And it was to say that you can't just throw in random numbers into a GCM. You have to do it advisedly and in a certain way. So the point was that if you're going to integrate random numbers in a general circulation model, it can be tricky, but there are ways around it. And if you ignore the rigor, you're going to condemn yourself to the hell of wrong results and eternal debugging. So this poster was called The History of GCM Faustus, Part 1, with apologies to Marlowe and Goethe. And I'm not going to tell you why it was Part 1, because we all had to read Faust in high school, right? 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 No? Okay. Well, anyway, Faust gets redeemed in Part 2, and he doesn't get redeemed in this. The other thing I want to point out that I got roundly criticized for, and rightly so, was the use of Gothic script. And I'll show you why in a minute. I will show you why in a minute. Okay, so this is what the poster looked like from a distance. All right, so we have the Holy Writ, we have the commentary, we have the prophets, we have the archangels, we have the angel standing before Steve Lord, who was the Lord, who was the head of EMC at the time. So this was the poster from a distance. Now, what do? The first thing you do is you show that there has been a lot of work on developing the numerical schemes which can handle stochastic forcing. And the reason you don't want to use Gothic script is because you do not want your audience trying to figure out that this is an S and this is a Y instead of looking at, you know, the message of your poster, okay? But the first thing the poster does is say, yes, there are right ways to do it. The second thing you do is admit that it's really hard, that it's a very hard problem, okay? So tempted by model complexity, GCM and SPAM, oh yeah, stochastic parameterization, SPAM for short. Consider going the naive route, that is just throwing random numbers into your general circulation model. And what this does, it says, yeah, we're not going to rewrite a whole GCM. All right, yeah, I take that. So, long story shorter, there are two holy archangels. There are data assimilation methods, and there's the central limit theorem, and together they come along and save the day. Basically, by using data assimilation methods to throw random numbers in your model, in the forward integration, you can take advantage of the central limit theorem in order to get the answer you want. However, it's not your grandmother's central limit theorem. It's a this is de Moivre is our grandmother, by the way. Our parents are Laplace, Wiener, Poisson, all of those. But at any rate, you put the theorem up there, nobody's going to read it, nobody's going to understand it, you don't care. You just want to say, yes, there is a theoretical background for this, I know what it is, and I can help you with it if you email me, okay? So the thing is that it's not the central limit theorem where you're adding a whole bunch of numbers up and suddenly they're Gaussian distributed. It's a dynamical version of this. Okay? So even if people don't understand exactly what you're talking about, they will remember the images and they will go back and try to find things out for themselves. So the messages are, entertainment is not the primary goal of humor in a professional setting. It can help, and it should help, and it is a necessary but not sufficient condition, okay? You use humor to make a point, and this point can either be scientific, mathematical, or political. I know, we're all thinking, I'm shocked to find there's politics in this field. However, if you're a lowly government grunt, and your research is truly, truly hated by Professor Ivy League, and he goes around saying that this person is off a rocker, that's a direct quote, by the way, you have to actually get people to look beyond the credentials and actually read the papers, and humor can do that. It was the best of results, it was the worst results, it was the white noise limit, it was the no noise limit. The variance exploded, the variance vanished. In short, 'tis a far, far better thing we do with data than anything we ever did with assumptions. Okay. Humor can be used against prejudice. I mean, you use humor and you either exaggerate it so much that, as Josh was saying, people agree with you. Or they, I guess it wasn't Josh, I guess it was Roger. Where's Roger? He's, okay. So one of these esteemed gentlemen had said that when you make a person laugh at it, they're admitting the truth. Okay. It can diffuse an uncomfortable situation. This is particularly true when 2 weeks before the AGU and your research hasn't worked out and you're saying, oh my God, what am I going to talk about? And so you say, oh, the heck with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have devils, witches, and zombies say everything that went wrong with my research. And then when you're putting the poster together, sometimes you even solve it. And this happened this time. 2 weeks ago, I didn't have anything to present, and now I'm writing the paper. Humorous schematics can improve retention. All right. Who remembers the picture that I showed of the Poisson-Wiener-Levy family? Okay, so you all remember that they are related. So you see Levy process, and so you can go back and say, oh yeah, this has something to do with continuous white noise. I mean, you know, something that's continually varying. You have a deterministic part to it, and then you have jumps, okay? So, I mean, it can improve the retention. Visual metaphors affect the audience on different levels. At this point, I was supposed to push this without pointing to the fact that Simon's cat would appear right here. And if you've ever seen a picture of Simon's cat curled up, it looks just like the Ezra logo. Okay, and that's one reason why the Ezra logo is so memorable. But it affects the audience on different levels. There's the broad humor, there's the subtle humor, there's this, oh yeah, I remember this book I read in high school. And so it makes them feel good about themselves. I mean, this is a good thing. And even if your audience doesn't follow everything, you can give them enough to follow up on their own, but you have to interest them first. I mean, unless someone is more interested in being a scientist than they are in doing science, then jargon will not help. You have to somehow make them feel that this is interesting in its own right. And there's nothing better than doing that than humor. So thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has a question, please use the mic. Well, I guess we can keep moving along. Oh, we got questions, even better.
Thank you for having this session. It's a great way to spend the last 2 hours of AGU, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I had the pleasure and also the sadness of being with Kelly a couple weeks before he died, and I always just remember this one slide that he had of, well, is the climate changing? We'll have to ask the pines their opinion. And, you know, that just really stuck with me. And, you know, what I found is that humor is really disarming. And self-deprecating humor in particular can be highly effective. And I found, you know, I learned some of my techniques from Steve Schneider and Paul Ehrlich, who have that kind of black humor about tragic global situations. And I've just found it to be incredibly effective. So, you know, again, just thank you for having this session. I think it's going to inspire a lot of good jokes.
But it's more than a lot of good jokes. I mean, you know, Kelly really was able to be subtle in his humor many times. And honey is easy to swallow. Kitty litter isn't.
That slipped right by me.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody had noticed, so I thought I'd give you another chance. So thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. I'd like to thank Cecile again. So our next talk was technically withdrawn. It turns out there's a competing research session going on that our speaker had to attend. But the wonderful news is that we have Gavin Schmidt. And Gavin, come on up. I asked him if he was going to be juggling while he did anything, and he told me juggling wasn't funny, but I guess he's quite a juggler. But do you want to introduce your...
Yeah, can you... Yeah, so with no notice, they say, can you do like 15 minutes at a comedy session? I'm going, no. So I made a movie instead. So, okay. Sound is on.
the science men, they said a couple things. They said every year they look at all the numbers at the end of the year, and it turns out most of the time, for most years, July is the hottest month of that particular year. And I thought back when I was a kid, all right? 4th of July, always hot, always July. So the evidence bears that out. July, okay, I'm not arguing with that. What I'm arguing with is what they said next. Because what they said next was July of last year, the last July that we had, was the hottest month on Earth ever. And that's a big thing to say, because we're not quite done with ever yet, okay? It's a little premature to be handing out trophies, okay? We got a long time. Ever for the Earth began when the Earth began, which was 4.5 billion years and 2.5 years ago. I've done all the research. I'm talking to specialists who specialize in that specialty, and they told me that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and that was 2.5 years ago, so you would have to add that. And the Earth will continue to exist for another 5 to 7 billion years, minus the 2.5 years that we've already used up. At which time the sun turns into a red giant and consumes the Earth. So that spread, that is ever for the Earth, and we're not even halfway done. You don't crown a champion before mid-season, all right? Let's see how it plays out. It might not even be the hottest month of the decade, okay? And I'm not a gambling guy, but if I were, I'd put all my money on probably the last month of ever. I bet you that's going to be kind of hot. When the sun expands 250 times its size and turns into a 5,000-degree ball of nuclear fusion, vaporizing every atomic bond that holds the Earth's very existence together, that's got to be hotter than July. July was hot, all right, but I distinctly remember not vaporizing.
I started my career as an astrophysicist, so you can believe me when I say that this is the greatest place in the universe. Other planets might have liquid water. On Earth, we have whiskey.
Good evening. Joining me tonight, a climate change denier and naturally
yourself. There'd be nothing to worry about if I took this arsenic and dissolved it in wine. This wine is probably about 250 grams, and the arsenic is only a tenth of a gram, a tiny fraction. So, the wine represents the atmosphere, and the arsenic represents the CO2. Now, let's see if tiny concentration of substance can have catastrophic effect. Yeah, I get your point. Please stop. I feel, see, things with tiny concentrations can still have big effects. I just wish I thought of that steady way of proving that point. Well, that's completely ruined dinner.
Anyway, the report says that there is a 90% chance of global warming being caused by human activity, and it predicts that the next 100 years' temperatures could rise by as much as 5.8 degrees Celsius. And if that ever became Fahrenheit, we would be screwed. These findings are cause for concern, and they're also the subject of tonight's word. When I go to the doctor, I don't accept his diagnosis unless it's something I like. And if he's right, and that rash on my chest is an allergy to shellfish, that means I can't eat shrimp anymore. And I love shrimp. So, see, I go from doctor to doctor until I find one who will tell me that it's just eczema. Then I can eat all the shrimp I want. Damn. Nothing seems at all. But anyway, Scriptac was a nice napkin. We can handle global warming the same way, folks. Sure, this new report sounds horrible, but as long as we can find one scientist who said it's not happening, then it's not happening. And the administration is working very hard to find these one scientists. In fact, in a congressional hearing last week, a witness testified that almost 60% of government climate scientists claim they were, quote, pressured to eliminate references to climate change. That's doing something to eliminate the problem. It doesn't matter why the scientists left out references to global warming. They did. That means it's not happening. But folks, coercion will only take us so far. That's why I was happy to read that the American Enterprise Institute, a think tank funded in large part by ExxonMobil, just offered scientists $10,000 each to dispute this week's climate report. I've always said the best science is the kind you pay for. That's how we found out that cigarettes stimulate the T-zone. Although $10,000 might not be enough to get the science we want. To get that, we need to start paying scientists the way we pay ExxonMobil executives. Last year, they gave their outgoing CEO $400 million. That's obscene. We could use that money to pay off 40,000 scientists. Of course, there are going to be some holdouts, because hard as it is to believe, some scientists don't get into it for the money. But we don't need all of it. Just you cast reasonable doubt. Because even if 99.9% of experts believe global warming is happening, as long as there's any disagreement, well, then all the science isn't in. You disagree? How about I give you $10,000 and you give me a second opinion? And that's the word. We'll correct it.
With summer fast approaching, everyone's talking about the sun and how great it is. But do we really need the sun? I mean, if you believe the media, the sun is a happy breakfast friend or a disembodied baby head. Scientists will tell you it has more practical uses. I spoke to NASA employee and sun apologist Dr. Ronald Miller.
Do we really need the sun? I mean, no. Well, this is kind of the sun, of course, for light. Come on. Well, the sun is also necessary for plants to grow. I mean, come on. Ultimately, all life on Earth depends on the sun. Excuse me. Hello?
But here's what Dr. Miller and other sun fetishists are telling you. Proximity for the sun. It's a scam. The sun is the only source of light and warmth. Come on. Only the sun grows plants. Please. I had no trouble growing In fact, man has improved on everything the sun does. We tried 2 different methods of getting a tan, which was sensitive to the air. And further research shows the sun is actually harmful. When we got tough with Dr. Miller,
The truth was revealed.
The sun is hot due to a nuclear reaction.
That's right. The sun is an evil nuclear superpower, which explains how it can turn these beautiful grapes into inedible turds. Given its obvious dangers, why is the sun so popular? I decided to follow the money. And the money led us straight to Mr. Softy.
Is it true your business is dependent on the sun? What are you hiding? Hey! Hey! What are you afraid of, Softy?
The only saving grace is that the sun won't always be there.
Eventually the sun will explode, it will collapse down into a very small and a very dark and a very dense body.
And on that day, I'll breathe a sigh of relief.
That'll happen in about 5 billion years.
So thank you very much for talking to us today. I would love to give you this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you see this island here? This wasn't an island. This was all connected. So you can see within a year's time how much land disappeared.
Do you think that's because the sea level was rising?
Nope. It's because of erosion.
A tiny speck in Chesapeake Bay, Tangier is home to a small and very religious community of hardy crabbers. It's so lovely that Charming AF magazine recently awarded it a full 10 AFs. Tragically, Tangier is rapidly disappearing into the Chesapeake because of sea level rise.
Erosion, not sea level rise.
No, sea level rise caused by global warming.
That's the biggest hoax ever was.
No!
Climate change is real.
No way, honey. You could never change my mind.
That's because as evangelicals, they're among those Americans least likely to believe in climate change.
Let me throw this out there and we'll let it land. We don't even have to discuss it. What if climate scientists are actually doing God's work? This is such a great place. It's too bad what's happened because of all the, the sea level rising.
The wave erosion.
Sea rise.
Wave erosion.
The sea level is rising.
And
it's
the
like
wave
really
action's
obvious.
coming in, eroding the shoreline.
Sea rise.
It is a shame.
Sea rise.
Wave erosion.
Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
So I think Gavin did a great job, and I think it's only fair to ask him questions about how he selected those clips. From my perspective, they were novel, and maybe you could comment a little bit about that.
Clip selection is basically determined by how easy it was to rip off YouTube. So it's actually a little tricky, but some of them it was easy and some of them were hard. You know, they're the things that I thought were funny that kind of linked together.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, Cecile, why don't you use the mic? Oh, we got two.
Can I take a turn? I have to apologize, I have a cold, but I'm not sure, I bet you are all aware of the letter that Alexander Pyron published in the Washington Post about a month ago. And he used geological arguments mixed with let just everything happen to defend that humans can change climate, but ultimately the Earth will correct everything. So today there has been a response in the Washington Post, but I wonder how in the geoscientist, climate community here, how you would respond to that, or did you respond to that? It's not directly to your film, but it's about the topic.
I mean, I saw the letter this morning. I have nothing else to say, really. Sorry.
Okay.
The reason I didn't show the actual image of Simon's cat is because they never got back to my request for copyright.
Copy what?
Exactly.
Sorry,
permission.
Can you repeat that?
So this is a serious thing about using humor. One of the reasons I use classical images is because they're in the open literature. Can you tell me, do we really have the right to use these? You thank them, but I mean, what do you have to do to get the copyright permissions, or do you need them? I don't know. I've been playing safe.
Copyright? What?
Yeah, right.
No, so you can use little bits of things as fair use. You can't use whole things, and you can't then use that to do commercial stuff. But for teaching purposes, for speaking purposes, you can use clips of almost anything.
Okay.
So don't ask permission. You're not going to get it.
Okay, thanks. You don't know how freeing this is.
Do we have another question coming in? Or?
No.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I shouldn't be encouraging illegality. I mean, copyright's a very, very serious business, but...
Your video very nicely showed what Mark Twain once said, that it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them that they have been fooled. So what is, how do you look at it? In other words, should the effort be in continuing to try to convince people that they have been fooled, or somehow should we change the metaphor and change the story?
So the fact of the matter is that most people mostly don't think very deeply about the opinions that they hold on most subjects. Most people accept that climate change is occurring. Most of them understand that humans are contributing, even if they don't know the magnitude of that. In order to get people to be more accepting in like kind of subtle ways, it just needs to be a bigger part of the conversation, so that when people make jokes about it on late night TV, it's not seen as an oddity. It's just like, oh well, we joke about billionaires, we joke about climate change. It's because it's there, and the more that we can make the science that we do part of the everyday background, the more people will just accept it, because they'll just kind of, it will be part of the environment, and and the opinions that they absorb kind of by osmosis, as opposed to really digging down and looking into things. But obviously it would be better if people dug down and looked into things on their own, so they could see what the data showed and what but most people are not going to do that, unfortunately. So by seeding the environment with mostly correct science and statements, you kind of inch it in by osmosis, and I think that helps. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Gavin. This is when it gets interesting. So I believe we're going to be switching it over. The next speaker is Joellen Russell, and she's going to talk about this once and future battles of Thor and the Midgard Serpent, the Southern Ocean's role in climate. And now I'm going to show my technical expertise and get it up on the screen.
Well, all right, all right, all right. So no shit, there I was, in the deep Southern Ocean. I mean, so far from land that like Pitcairn Island was like the next stop. I'm a second-year graduate student. It is unbelievably bad weather. I'm watching the anemometer kind of waver around 85 knots, and the water is getting crazy. 300-foot ship, chug, 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 up the side of the wave, up the side of the wave in a 300-foot ship, shush, down the other side. Almost 0 G, you can feel it. Dig the prow into the other side and watch this mountain of water fall on the ship, pressing her down. You thought she was gonna get crunched like a beer can. I'm not kidding, no kidding. And then she'd shudder and shake and try and get herself back up to the surface. You're like, I still have a little oceanographic PTSD. I mean, seriously, I'm not joking. I wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about black water over my head, but that's because it almost was, right? So I'm a second-year grad student at Scripps. This is my first really big far from land 49-day cruise in the winter in the roaring 40s, and I am not gonna let this opportunity sit. And the waves are unbelievable, and it's my job to get that XBT off the end of the fantail. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm looking out. Oh, it looks pretty bad. I'm looking out. Wow, that looks really bad. Okay, got the line on, got my zoot suit on, I'm ready, the first mate's on the winch. I'm like, all right, we're going out. And I head out onto the deck. And sure enough, halfway across the deck, whoa, down it comes, and I'm underwater. My feet come out from under me, and it's rushing me towards the open fantail with just a chain across the back. And I can't breathe, and I'm still hanging on to this stupid XBT. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what do I do? And okay, the happy ending, the steel-toed boot I was wearing got stuck in the hook next to where the chain hooks onto the back of the fantail. And of course, the first mate had me and wasn't gonna let me go over. And I'm sure the line wouldn't have snapped because it was cold. And I was fine, But it impressed upon me this lifelong obsession with the Southern Ocean. It's my thing. Oh my God, there's nothing I love better than maybe my 2 sweet babies and my husband, but I tell you, it was something else. And I grew up in an Eskimo fishing village, 31 miles above the Arctic Circle, north of the Bering Straits on the Chukchi Sea. So I knew, or I thought I knew, what wind felt like. I was sure I knew what the worst blizzard, the worst winds ever felt like, because I grew up there. And I was wrong. The westerlies in the southern hemisphere are 30% stronger than the ones in the northern hemisphere because the southern hemisphere doesn't have speed bumps like the Himalayas or the Rocky Mountains, etc. So this was a big deal. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we found. And I got back to Scripps after my long, how do I advance this sucker?
I would use the Mac one.
Okay. So I got back from my big cruise and I said, I want to do this. What is going on down there? This is wild. And I looked up everything I could find, and I'll tell you, the thing that intrigued me the most, I did the science, I did the PhD in oceanography, you know, I went and worked with Mike Wallace up at the University of Washington on the winds, you know, on the southern annular mode, in UW atmosphere. I went to GFDL after that so that I could model it. But I tell you, the best story I ever heard about how this worked was the story of Thor and the Midgard Serpent. And going to sea is tough. And humans have been talking about going to sea and how tough it is for a really long time. And there's this unbelievably cool Norse myth called the story of Thor and the Midgard Serpent. And it's basically the story of Hymir the Giant. And you can see these, there's lots of this story, actually, if you look for it. Once you start looking, it's everywhere. So you can see it in all kinds of written, carved, drawn, and comic book culture. It's everywhere. It's really cool. So Thor and the Midgard Serpent. Thor is jealous of Hymir the Giant, who's considered to be the best fisherman in all of Norway, the best, because he's huge, and he rows out way further. He has secret fishing areas that are further than anybody's ever gone, right? And Thor's jealous, so he walks out, he disguises himself as a youth and walks down to the shore and says, hey, Hymir, why don't you take me with you? And Hymir looks at him and goes, no way, I'm not taking you. So Thor, being the god of thunder and wind, rips the head off an ox and says, I have bait. I have bait. So Hymir says, all right, you can come with me. And they get out and they start to row. And they row and they row and they row. And they get out past anywhere even Hymir has gone. And he's like, oh, wait, the water's getting rough. This is far enough. And there goes, heck it is. And he puts his back into it because Thor is the god of wind and thunder and storm. And he rows them out further than they've ever gone. He rowed them to the Southern Ocean. And of course, they get out there and Thor baits his hook, throws that head over the side, and he fishes, and he gets a bite. He gets the biggest bite that ever was. The Midgard serpent that wraps around the bottom of the ocean, biting its own tail, comes up and grabs the ox's head and pulls. He pulls so hard, he whacks Thor's arms into the gunnel, which just makes him mad. And you have these rune carvings where they show his feet go down through the bottom of the boat, and he stands on the bottom of the ocean, and he pulls. And he pulls that head all the way up out of the water, all the way up. And Hymir is in the bottom of the boat just cowering, oh, please, stop. And he finally reaches out and cuts the line. And the Midgard Serpent sinks back down below the waves, and the battle ends for that time. Now, it's said that come Ragnarok, in fact, what will happen is the Midgard Serpent will win by poisoning Thor. And that Thor, the god of storm and thunder, will, and that signals the end of the world. So I want to tell you what we find in our research. So, now that I've got your attention, come with me. This is really cool. I teach 900 students oceanography at a time at the University of Arizona when I'm not doing my research. And it is a lot of fun, but they are a great audience and have helped me work on my material for years. So the westerlies are really interesting. We talked about them, and in this metaphor, it's Thor represents our big westerlies and what's happening to them now. And we think that, in fact, we project from climate model simulations that they're going to contract poleward, basically poleward intensifying, and we've already observed this over the last 30 years. And I'll just put him in there just for reference, so you all know what I'm talking about. And under higher CO2 scenarios, and you're looking at RCP 8.5, you see a profound change in where the westerlies sit in both hemispheres. They basically move polewards. And this has big implications. And we know that the kickoff was ozone related in the southern hemisphere, but that even after that, the greenhouse gas warming, which is basically making our westerlies tilt out towards the poles, that in fact, it's going to continue even if the ozone hole recovers, but maybe not as aggressively. So think about this. Thor and the battle with the deep ocean. And what am I talking about there? Well, the Southern Ocean. The ocean around Antarctica is special. It's special. It's the window to the deep ocean, the only place where there's direct upwelling from very deep waters to the sea surface. And this is important because this threshold region, the battlefield for Thor and the Midgard Serpent here, is where that deep ocean sees the surface. And so let's just point this out. So in 2015 was the hottest year, and I'm going to update that, just wait. And you'll notice it's warming everywhere except for 2 blue spots. One south of Greenland and the other around Antarctica. And you've actually seen meteorologists get up on the weather news and say, hey, that means it's not warming down there. Baloney. Of course it's warming. It's just being mixed down into the ocean. Of course, of course. Here's the hottest year in 2016, again with our little blue stripes, because this is what the ocean's doing. And this is one of my favorite figures of all time. For all of my Atmo colleagues who are like, yeah, it's all the atmosphere. I'm like, really? Global warming is not the atmosphere. Global warming is ocean warming. 93% of the top of the atmosphere energy imbalance goes into the ocean. The ocean is the dog, the atmosphere is just the tail. Sorry, Gavin, I apologize, but it's true. You can't even see it in the cheap seats. The atmosphere is such a small part. Now, it is important to remember that, of course, that's where we live, right? So it is important. And of course, I've included, I'll just point out that the white part there is for Richard, because that's the ice that's melting. So what's the role of the Southern Ocean in the global climate system? It accounts for 67 to 98% of the excess heat that's transferred from the atmosphere into the ocean. So somewhere between 2/3 and all of the ocean warming is going in south of 20 South in the Southern Ocean. This is from Dean Remick's brilliant paper from Argo, and it's okay, let's just sit for that for a second. That's a huge amount. So where am I studying? I'm studying the most important battlefield on planet Earth. Woo! 2, it accounts for up to half of the annual oceanic uptake of anthropogenic carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Half! Woohoo! 3rd, vertical exchange in the Southern Ocean is responsible for supplying nutrients that fertilize 3/4 of the biological production in the global ocean north of 30. The Millennium Project and others tell us that this is a significant source of protein to the developing world in particular. It means food. It means changes in food. So we need to know, we need to see what is changing. So it also matters to us here in the United States. I'll just point out I live in the great state of Arizona, which is under that bullseye of redness for warming. And also, if you look at where it's getting really dry, yeah, that's us too. Absolutely. So we have a profound interest in knowing what goes on in this battle between Thor and the Midgard Serpent, because we would like to know what happens when the dog wags the tail. Woohoo. So we'll get on to this. All right, so how do we measure what is going on in the ocean? There's all the World Ocean Database of shipboard measurements from 99 to 2015 and the top plot, and that's Argo on the bottom. Yes! Argo is transforming how we see 70% of the world's surface. That ocean heat content is helping us improve prediction because it gives you how deep is that layer of warm water and what's happening to create it, change it, and advect it around. It's amazing. This is what we have for carbon and PCO2. There's a number of months. Notice the white spaces everywhere. And this is, of course, what we've been doing with biogeochemical Argo floats. There were 2 profiles in the Southern Ocean of pH, and now all of these little triangles are the new profiles done by our biogeochemical Argo floats. We are changing the world with respect to carbon and the way we measure it in the ocean. It's a huge deal. We're there. This is our ringside seat, and it's the Southern Ocean Carbon and Climate Observations and Modeling Program, funded by the National Science Foundation's Polar Programs, also NOAA put up half of our floats from Argo, and NASA, of course, was generous and gave us the optical sensors for all of our floats. If it sounds like we went around passing the hat, it's because we did. We totally did. And this is my student at Arizona who became Jorge Sarmiento's student at Princeton and then is now a Giseo Fellow up at the University of Washington. She's my intellectual daughter, which makes her Lynn Talley's intellectual granddaughter. And don't be laughing about her being an intellectual grandma, because I see some great grandpas out there. I know some of you. Several intellectual generations. And this is what we can see in real time. We're actually watching the acidification of the ocean as it happens. For real. They also go under the ice. Steve Reiser's 2 lines of code that says, hey, dummy, look at your salinity sensor. If you hit the halocline, go back down, so they don't bang their heads on the sea ice roof. It's pretty amazing. And we're assimilating all that data into a Southern Ocean State Estimate, which is actually allowing us to get actual carbon reanalysis for the ocean. How cool is that? Never been done before. We're actually, these are just showing you how awesome they are. This is temperature, this is DIC, that's the Midgard Serpent. And we're watching from our ringside seats with these amazing, amazing floats. And then we're using that to actually look at how well our climate models are doing. And I'm gonna have to skip here because I've actually run my time here. Sorry. Oh, okay, I won't worry. But this is the GFDL CM 2.6, which is a genius model. I love those guys so much. When they put their epitaphs, they better write things like courage, integrity, and endurance, because those guys have got it. Wow, look at this model. I tell my kids, I'm like, Mama uses supercomputers and math, and I can see the future, baby. And that's the math right there. Woo! Isn't that cool? We're running out of the burning building of the past, just carrying what we can into the dark night of the future, and we're using climate models to shine a little light on the path in front of our feet. Just a little light. How much would you give to be able to not fall flat on your face? It's so important. It's so important. And they face things like furloughs and potential government shutdowns and BS extraordinaire, and they persist. They endure. They keep doing it with integrity and great cheer. It is kind of amazing. If you haven't met them, say hello to an ocean modeler. You have to hear my horrible ocean modeler joke. It's so bad. I have to do it anyway. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. How do you tell an introverted ocean modeler from an extroverted ocean modeler? The extroverted ocean modeler looks at your shoes when he talks to you. I'm one of them, so I feel really bad, but I'm sort of their token extrovert, so apologies. I love you guys. So some models are closer to observations than others, so we're working on this. And so we're making metrics of all these different kinds of observational quantities, so we can test these models. We can really give them the business, find out where they're good, where they're bad, and what's wrong, and is there things that we can understand better that we can do to actually improve them, to shine a better light on the path in front of our feet. And so I'm just going to skip through the heavy science. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist it. Hey there, beauty. She's a pretty girl, isn't she? So what we've been doing is to actually grow the community too. So we just had our hashtag Great Antarctic Climate Hack at Scripps. It was brilliant. So many people came. It was so much fun. Scientists from around the world basically working to bring their observational data sets to bear on climate models, and us trying to lower the barriers so that they could get in there and do their work. It was a blast. We had so many sponsors, we looked like a NASCAR racer, basically stickers all over. And this is not everybody. This is just the people who were there. Everybody else came in online. No carbon emissions. Woot, woot. It was amazing. Thank you to all of you who stayed up at 2 in the morning to do this with us. It was a blast. So we're putting that in the ESMVal tool so that it's available for IPCC 6. Yay! More tools, more fun, better evaluations. And we'll put a spotlight on that beauty. And we think it's happened in the past. We think that, in fact, these glacial and interglacial changes basically are CO2 going in and out of the Southern Ocean, and that the winds determine how much of that CO2 partitions into the atmosphere and into the ocean, and that it reorganized the atmosphere from glacial times to interglacial. You know, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists actually made me their distinguished lecturer and had me, a global warming scientist, go around. You want to know how many times I got heckled? 0. 0. They were great. They asked interesting questions. They were really great hosts. And I went to the oil patch from Saskatoon to Houston. I tell you, it was awesome. So whenever you make jokes about our geocentric industry colleagues, just remember they actually want to know too. It's their kids as well, and they're working at it. They're working at it. So we think that this feedback worked in the past. We think that this threshold is super important in the future. And we're getting a better bead on what she's doing. So one of the ways we're looking at improving the models is with the Southern Ocean Modeling and Comparison Project, which we're also doing. And we've got some ideas about how this is working and some preliminary results, which are coming out soon. Very exciting. Ben Bronsler and Mike Winton at GFDL are doing, our collaborators here, and they are doing a genius job. And we're comparing it to the observations from Denton and Putnam, who have done these amazing glacial retreat. Coincident, all at the same time, very fast melting of ice on land. It's brilliant. It is so cool. And again, of course, this is who I think is responsible. So we're looking at this. It's lots of fun, and we think we can help. Trust but verify. Inez Fong gave an amazing talk on verification, on what could we do. And this is where we're headed. Bottom up doesn't work. It's self-reported. Top down is what we'd like to have. And we think there's a possibility of making it work if we can reduce the uncertainties in the ocean sink by deploying more of these floats. And we've done some observing system design experiments and observing system simulation experiments to check it out. And we think basically we need about 800 floats. And we've got 200 already. So if anybody wants to, help with some floats, you know who to talk to. But it's going to go great. We've already got a plan for all of this. 5 years ago, we didn't have an international political agreement to address the carbon cycle. We didn't have a carbon observing satellite. We didn't have our system models, and we didn't have biogeochemical Argo floats. We have all the pieces. We can do a global carbon reanalysis. It's within our grasp. Within 5 years, we could be doing this. So what comes next? Build out the array of BGC Argo floats, build operational carbon data model assimilation, and save the planet, or at least the humans. Thank you.
So we have time for just a few questions. Thank you very much for getting us back on time. So if you have questions, please use the mic. So if you have a question, use the mic, please. No.
So did you deploy the XBT?
I did, actually. I'm not joking. When the water went, I was still holding on to it, and I dumped it over the side. We have data. Really? Nobody else? Awesome. Thank you.
So our final talk is going to be given by the esteemed Richard Alley. Richard thought there would be at least 8. I bet on 9 people in the room. So the first thing I'd like to do is thank everybody for staying and being here. Because Richard didn't believe you'd be here. So Richard's giving a talk. It was submitted by Jim White. Don't ask, don't tell. Sorry, Cecile, we just don't ask. We just do.
All right, so yeah, somebody should take a picture of this and send it to Jim White. So this is fantastic. Thank you. Joellen sent me up perfectly. The least shall be last. And so this is my, if the mouse works, this is my Midgard Serpent. I'm the guy there. So for what you're worth, we'll see what we can do here. So I am not Jim White. Dean, Director, Professor Dr. James White, he's a dean now. So that means he's doing email and cleaning the toilets or whatever deans do. He sent 2 ideas that we should think about. One was, if I wanted 4 people to show up to hear me, I'd better give away free drinks at the door. He suggested hurricanes with little umbrellas. The other suggestion he sent was that he said we should refer to this documentary about employment in the federal government, Men in Black. And if you can read the text there, the question is whether our organizers are allowed to have a sense of humor as federal employees. Maybe Robin can address that in the discussion. Okay, so at any rate, I'm gonna bring you back down. I've never been intentionally funny successfully, but I'm gonna do a little preaching to the choir, but sometimes, you know, the choir likes to hear a good sermon too. So we'll see what, and I'm going to show penguins. I crossed the Southern Ocean. The hero rolled past 45, and I just threw up all over it. So, so whatever is you can do, right? I got a different out of the Southern Ocean than Joellen did. So I'm going to start with a true story on me, just a little on me. I was a very late adopter of cellular telephones. I didn't want to be bothered. And the day came, I was supposed to give a talk down in Baltimore. It's 170 miles away. There's a little snow. I got in the car. I drove to Baltimore. You know, that's what you do, right? And so a couple of you in this audience are old enough that you might remember the movie Failsafe. Henry Fonda was the president, an amazing president, and the bombers had been launched to drop the atomic bombs, and they couldn't be recalled. Right, well, on a much smaller scale, that was me. They called my dear wife about 20 minutes after I left, and they said, it's too dangerous to drive, we're closing the museum and going home. Right, so I get to Baltimore. It's not, I mean, this is Baltimore, right? It's that much snow. And I get to Baltimore, the museum's locked. And I go over to hard to find a phone, but I finally found a phone, and I called my dear wife, and she said, you're getting a cell phone. Right, so I have a cell phone. And I want to do this. I've got it here, right? I do a lot of public talks to various and sundry groups. And if you ever go into a 5th grade class, it's worth doing, right? You go into a 5th grade class and you say, what is this? And they say, it's your phone or your cell phone or your smartphone. And the ones in front will say, it's sort of a little one, isn't it? You're not very cool, are you? And then you say, what's it made of? And you'll get silence for a moment, and if it's a 5th grade class, somebody will say, cell phone parts? All right? What's it made of? And I'm going to show it to you, right? You know the story. There's some sand in there that gets you silicon for the chip and gets you the glass. And there's some sort of organic material like oil that gets you the plastic on the back. And there's the right rocks, not these actually, but the ones with the palladium and the rare earth elements and that sort of stuff. And that's all it is sand and oil and rocks and, you know, and science and engineering and a little design and marketing. And I want you to do for me a mental experiment. Suppose that we put together a do-it-yourself cell phone kit. Okay, it's on the left. And now imagine that we took that and we gave it to various groups. You know, the football team, the bridge club, the US Senate. And we said, okay, here you go. If you want a cell phone, this is a do-it-yourself kit. Have fun. Right? Now, my suspicion is that if you wanted to read Shakespeare's sonnets, you would be wiser to get a bunch of monkeys typing randomly on typewriters than you would to wait for that cellular telephone. Right? What is this thing is just flabbergasting. And, you know, we're going somewhere here. It has a computer in it, and you know the story. The computer is based on the transistor, and the transistor is invented at Bell Labs, that bastion of free enterprise that happened to have a government-granted monopoly. And when they built the thing, it was not competitive initially. How do you make it competitive? Well, you need some development. Where'd the money come from? A lot of it was from the Air Force. because they really wanted something a little more stable than tubes for what they were doing, right? And it's designed with quantum mechanics. And you can go down the list of the quantum mechanicists and people like Bohr and Feynman. And what did they do? They taught at universities, as well as inventing the future. Right? Now, this thing is connected to the internet. When I'm old enough, when I first logged onto the internet, it was the ARPANET. I was up at Wisconsin. I actually had dinner once with the inventor of packet switching, fantastic, Leonard Kleinrock, this fantastic guy at UCLA that's sending packets to Stanford that went on to Utah, that went on to us at Wisconsin. The whole friggin' internet grew out of the US government getting university scientists to get researchers to talk to each other to help military work. Right? You just run it through your head. Right now, when I drive places now, my wife and I are trying to live on one car, and we have for quite a while, which means I ride my bicycle and she gets the car. So when we drive anywhere together, I have my wife to tell me where to go. If I occasionally end up getting a Fleet Services car and driving to give a talk with my cell phone, and if I do that, then I have a nice lady in my phone that tells me where to go. Right? You probably, we used to have the guy with the Australian accent who told us where to go, but now I have a nice lady in my phone who tells me where to go. And you probably have a nice lady in your phone too, right? So you know this, you never drive alone, right? And she tells me where to go so we get home, that nice lady in my phone, right? And what does she do? She relies on GPS. So we never get into a mess. It tells her where we are without a guess, as she relies on GPS. Right now, there's a story here, and this is an important story. Okay. Joellen only teaches 900. I teach 1100. I just spent a while entering grades. Oh my goodness, you have no idea how many lives I just ruined. But right, and we oh, yes, okay. And we do reviews in this big class to rock videos that are really, really bad parodies sung off key. And I haven't recorded the GPS one yet. We will. But when I first, there's a point here, right? When I first met GPS, that's a picture of the late great Ian Willens on the left. He was my advisor. He was surveying motion of Antarctic ice streams, including the Willens ice stream. And when he measured the motion with the GPS, he had to bring the data home and do a lot of post-processing because there was something called selective availability. The data were dithered because the ability to do precise positioning in real time was national security because it's a US government military program. And it's in your pocket. And it's just truly amazing. And you know, we'll do this, right? And this is where I want to go with this, right? There is this complexity. Space-time is warped by gravity. To get it right, she needs relativity, for there is complexity, right? And so that GPS uses special and general relativity. The satellite goes faster than we do down here with our receiver, and we are deeper in Earth's gravity well than the satellite is. And the size of the correction is about 10 kilometers a day. She's in there doing about 10-meter accuracy, which means that if we did not have relativity, she would get lost in about 2 minutes. Right? And this is just fantastic. It's just truly fantastic. And, you know, so, right, Einstein's in your pocket with the nice lady in the phone. Right? And there's only one downside to this, and then I will get back to being serious. But, you know, she's never going to fall for me, though she gets us home inerrantly. For she and Albert are a thing you see, so she'll never, ever fall for me. Woe is me. Right? Right, so at any rate, that's me, 1977, working for Ian Willens, doing Antarctic glaciology. At that time, if you would ask a whole lot of the public, name the most esoteric, useless science that's ever been done, They would have said relativity and quantum mechanics. And I can't prove that, but I believe that. And there they are in your pocket every day, and you can't really seriously think about living life the way we do without them. And where did they come from? They came from public-private partnerships that were initiated by the public side in many cases and were based on university research that was science. All right? Let me do a little timeline for you. This is 1800 on the left, 2000 on the right. We'll do this quickly, right? So quantum mechanics starts probably with Planck around 1900, and that's sitting there in your computer. And relativity, Einstein first does special in 1905, and that's sitting there in the GPS. And I have to remember the rocks, right? Wegener, 1915, continental drift. We use that knowledge to help us find the palladium and the rare earth elements and all of that. The nice lady in the phone can hear me and can hear the phone and can hear the GPS, in part because she has filters to pull out a very small signal from a very noisy world. And those filters go back to Fourier. And Fourier, in 1824, says, you know, the surface of the Earth is warmer than it would be in radiative equilibrium with space. There's something going on in the atmosphere. And he made the imperfect analogy of a plate of glass over a sunlit box, making it warmer. And what we now know is the greenhouse effect. And so if we put Fourier on our timeline, over there on the left, the greenhouse effect, he hypothesizes, hey, if we change the composition of the atmosphere, it might change the climate, right? Tyndall, CO2, water vapor, wow, this could change the climate, right? Arrhenius, 1896, our fossil fuel CO2 can change the climate. He got the science fairly close to being right. His economics was stinky. He didn't think we'd ever burn enough fossil fuel to really make a difference. But what's in your phone working is newfangled. The fact that we can change the climate and poke the Midgard Serpent is old stuff, right? We have a better quantum mechanical understanding now, but the truth is the classical stuff was probably enough to get you there, right? And yet, you've had this too, and so have I, that people will pull out their cell phone and send you a note that says, hey, you scientists don't know what you're talking about, with a cell phone. And they're alive because of medicines, and they're fed because we found better ways to feed. And the truth is, they're good people. And they've been led astray by a few people who are stirring. It's easier to break things than it is to build them, and people have stirred up confusion. But there's a whole lot of really good people out there who will use their cell phone to say that we're idiots. And they pay our salaries. Right? And so, you know, there's days it'd be pretty easy to jump off the edge and just go home and give up. But, you know, I think we can land with a swim and head off into something good. There's your Southern Ocean, Joe. There you go. So let me go just a little bit farther, okay? So I'll be honest. I have met very few members of the public who said, wow, you published another scientific paper. Woo! Okay? But a new medicine, a new tool, a new invention, a new way to feed people, those go over a lot better. So my impression is that people care about the good we do for them. And that they're, you know, the papers are our path, but most of the people who pay our salary want the good we do. And that, unfortunately, for a whole lot of us raises a problem. Because we're sort of bad news. At really amazing levels, if you forecast a tornado, get in your basement. If the tornado actually takes out their house, they might thank you. But the truth is, they'd be much happier if you just make the tornado disappear. They don't want to deal with it. And if they have to dive in the basement and the tornado hits their neighbor, well, why did they have to dive in the basement? And a whole lot of what we do. And this is weather, this is climate, this is soil erosion, this is, you name it, I can go on. You know, pollution and landslides and earthquakes. your school is not strong enough, the earthquake will knock it down, you have to pay to strengthen it, is not good news to most people. It saves their kids, but it's still not good news. And we have to deal with that. And I think it is a challenge. So I want to show you something. These are some maps that came out of the Yale Climate Communications people. They were published. This particular version was published on CNN, but it comes from the great folks at Yale Climate Communications. These are U.S. opinions on issues of climate change, which is a narrow piece of what we do that I happen to work on. And what you're going to see here, remember that this is an area map, right? I'm from Pennsylvania. There's about 3 times as many people in Philadelphia as in Wyoming. But this is a valid way to look at the world. And in here, the redder is higher belief, the bluer is lower belief, okay? You will find all the universities on here pretty easily if you look closely. But this is climate changing? A little more than half of Americans say yes. Are humans causing it? It's the same map, but notice we're below half in a lot of the nation. Do scientists agree? This is where confusion can be generated easily. And this probably, belief in us causing it is actually higher than belief that we agree on this. That's confusion that probably was purchased. Is it bad? You up a little more. But then, should we spend money on research on renewable energy? Should we look for solutions? The moment you switch from problem to solution, it's the same map, but look where it went. And then the last one, and this is the one you got to take this one and the next one home with you. Are you talking about it to your neighbor? We can solve it. We're not talking about it. Okay? So a whole lot of people will say we can solve the problem even if they won't say there's a problem. Right? And I think there's a real lesson for us here. We have to communicate solutions as well as problems. We have to find the good as well as the bad. And this is where, in my little piece of all the things that you do, the full scholarship, if you take the IPCC and try to turn it into a tweet, it would be something like, there is strong scholarship shows that if we deal efficiently and wisely with faith and agreement with the problems facing us, not only do we get a cleaner environment, not only is it more ethical, not only does it help national security, but it gives us more jobs and a bigger economy. Economy, employment, ethics, environment, national security are in the same direction on this. And we have not told that story very well, right? And now, we'll finish up. 2 minutes, give me 2 minutes. Right, so there was a 2013 poll. You can see it, Zogby Analytics. 70% of Americans said they could not name a living scientist. 70% of Americans said they could not name a living scientist. You live next door to them. Okay? It is very easy for humans to get into an us versus them. It is very easy for scientists to be them if 70% don't know one of us. And that's worth taking home. And more non-scientists should know more scientists should know more non-scientists. We have to interact more. And so we gotta go two-way. We've gotta be out in the community. We have to learn, we have to teach, we have to share. And that comes back to humor. You're not all going to be humorous. I am not a humorist. I would not possibly compete with the people you heard earlier here. That's not my forte. I can't do it. But whatever works. Whatever works. Because the well-being of people really does depend on us and them being us together. And it really does depend on communicating the glory and the beauty of what we're doing, the learning that we're generating, and the good we can do. Okay? And so, humor, thank you. This is a fantastic thing. So let's all dive in, and thank you.
So some people might disagree with Richard that he's not a humorist and doesn't use humor. But I'd really like to thank him, and thank you for stepping up, stepping in, batting cleanup. What I'd like to do is ask our speakers to come up here, and I think, Roger, you want to wrap up, right? So.
Did you face the bright lights and answer these questions? No, that's. So, thank you all for being here. Let me see if we can. All right. See, I hope you're truly inspired. As I like to tell people, I once thought about being a pessimist, and I thought that's not going to work. So the idea, as we think through this, and Richard ended on a great note. One of the things in all of our studies we find out, it's not whether or not it's a physical or a social risk, but do people see themselves able to do something? And I wanted to end with something from Kelly Redmond. The magic that was Kelly. It's a full text page because that's how Kelly wrote, thought. But here's the thing. Here's our magic. This is something he wrote to contribute to the U.S. Drought Monitor, which he helped create. And it goes like this. During the drought, our ticker for the water year is still 2 inches, not counting. Sure, it's dry, can't even wait, keep up with Death Valley, which at the same time had 2.46 inches, now has parrots, orchids, and coconuts and cantaloupes, draped in a smothering blanket of kudzu. We had 0.0001 inches, a trace in August. The drop that fell was reportedly 0.6 millimeters in diameter, striking the gauge with a resounding plink of about 3 degrees from the vertical. Like all comets, our drops are named after their discoverer, so this one was known as raindrop DAPM, basically dose area of missing data. Athletic and educated, but sensitive and shy, it was described as a bit of a loner. Grew up in a good neighborhood, but kicked out by its parents when it couldn't carry its own weight. Couldn't carry its own weight. When the medics arrived, the badly injured droplet was undergoing dehydration and heat stroke. Despite mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, all hope soon evaporated. The drop was survived by no ancestors and descendants. Cremation occurred at death, and its molecules scattered to the 4 winds. One was seen near Kentucky just the other day. This is Kelly Redmond. If you can't, from the people that you have heard, if you can't see this type of magic of the complexity of the systems we study, then we're missing something. We're missing the magic. But we're also missing that something that is beyond communication. We like to talk about communication, but beyond that is the way we create our risks and the way we create our opportunities are not simply amenable to communication. It's amenable to us getting in there and people realizing what Richard said at the end. We are just like them, they are just like us. And we have similar values. So to wrap up, Kelly led us to form this session. He's a master of science, of wit, and of wisdom. He loved that Escher drawing, and the reason why he loved it is because it's in interactions like these, we create each other through new knowledge. That's exactly why he loved it. We began to draw each other and to understand new ideas. So he's our colleague and our friend, and I wanted to make sure, and Robin wanted to make sure, and everybody in this group, that we had some measure of thanks to somebody that's inspired a lot of this interaction. Thank you. Any broad comments, questions for the panel? We are ready to panelize you. Insights and opportunities.
You come to the...
Yeah, please come up.
Yeah, thank you for having a really entertaining session, but although it wasn't quite what was advertised, maybe this is my interpretation, I'm not trying to be funny here, but so it was about the use of humor in science communication, and so this is for anybody on the panel to take. And but one thing that these speakers really did, in their very different ways, did impress upon me was I went into this existential mode because I'm not a funny guy, so I said, what am I doing here? But there are 3 uses, listening to all the talks, I was thinking of 3 possible uses of humor. So one was the advertised use of humor in science, more effective science communication. And we didn't really hear too much about that. The second was about maybe using humor to inspire, say, students and more in an educational kind of capacity, that you don't want to bore your potential kind of colleagues with all the equations or whatever, and so you want to lighten the lighten the load a little bit. And the third, which actually occupied much more of the discussion, was the use of humor essentially to change minds, almost as a propaganda tool, and which is fine, okay, if you're on the right side of the angels. But the thing is, I don't know, and this is, so the talks were really not following what was in the what was advertised. And one of the things you did say, even in the advertisement, and I hope the panelists will address this, was can you give examples of the appropriate and inappropriate uses of humor? Or rather, the word was the best and the worst examples of humor. This is in your description for the session. Thank you.
Can we go to that? I would like to hold on and take the latter part of that, because I'm actually not accepting Prashant's premise about the beginning, because the role was not to study the use of humor, but to have examples and cases of it. So that's an interpretive mistake. The latter bit, I'd like to keep on from the standpoint of successes in using the approaches, since you all have been successful in doing so.
No,
I think it's a
Oh, it is on. Well, actually, I think it's actually very instructive to understand why humor fails, because if you don't understand why it fails, you're not gonna succeed. And so there have been, big productions and money put into things that people thought were humorous, but the audience upon which it landed thought it was offensive, thought it was victimizing, thought it was punching down, and in fact it generates a huge amount of bad publicity, and then everybody gets very defensive. Oh, it was only a joke. Well, you know what? It wasn't very funny, and we live in an era where many things are claimed as being funny to get away with being awful, and we should avoid that. And I think most of the stuff that everybody was talking about here clearly did avoid that. But when I was looking through, and asking people, well, what clips should I use? What should I mean, I saw some stuff that was truly awful. And I mean, there was one that was quite famous. There was the 10-10 campaign, which is a pretty good campaign in the UK. Had a video of climate skeptics being blown up. Because they were not towing the line. And if you take a population that already feels that they're being victimized and persecuted, and you demonstrate that they're going to be blown up, they take it very personally. And so, as a campaigning tool, it was a disaster. So you have to be, you do have to be careful, and you do need to study what doesn't work, because you'll never find out what actually works if you don't do that.
The self-deprecating almost always works. Yep. Even some of the things that Gavin chose, which were definitely on the lighter side of the spectrum, as he noted. The three skeptics being overwhelmed by the 97 was really cool, but if you do that in certain audiences who identify with the three, they're going to be uncomfortable. Yes. And so the very light stuff often goes a lot better. Joellen's Midgard Serpent's fantastic.
I've read about three major means of humor. So one is incongruity. Everybody knows girls aren't funny, so I got that one down. Yes. Two, they use competition. A winner, a loser, a good guy, a bad guy, I set you guys up. And three, wow, that's really loud. and three, relief. We make everybody uncomfortable, and then we say, and here's something we can do about it. And in fact, we go, oh, thank God, it's one of those. So I use all three on purpose. They are deliberate. I choose my anecdotes. I do it particularly to be on the optimistic side. I don't tend to like put down comedy, insult comedy, because I find that that's really corrosive for my students. And especially since I have a PhD and I've spent my whole life training, if I'm talking to absolutely anybody in the world practically, if I'm putting them down, I am an evil, horrible bully. And there's just no way to do that. So there are other means of comedy. I choose the 3 I use very, very deliberately. It looks like I'm just telling you guys a good story, but it's choice, it's practice, and teaching an incredibly large class with very, very good students who are very helpful in pointing out when it flops.
Very good. Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm going to use an example where the same concept, fire, worked and when it didn't. There was a poster where a person had put in an abstract and it didn't work out, so they had on their poster, all this idea did was get people burned, and they had, people being burned at the stake. And that was funny because what happened was that this person was basically criticizing himself. Now, there was a chairman of a Met department in California that shall remain nameless, and she was taking a book that was written by a climate skeptic, and she put on she put on YouTube a picture of her burning this book, and that went straight against everybody's view, because after all, you're burning other people's ideas, et cetera, like that. She really wished she hadn't done it after that happened. It went down but the point is that you take a strong image, and if you use it against yourself, it's funny, and if you use it for something else, it usually isn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's another view of a stakeholder. Last question.
Well, this is a comment, because I'm actually working on a book trying to use humor to reach the people who can't be convinced that they've been fooled. But one thing about humor is it allows us to see ourselves as we really are. Oh, I wanted to mention, Richard Alley went into a bar. He says, "Bartender, how big are penguins?" And the bartender says, "Oh, about 4 feet." He says, "Oh my God, I just ran over a nun." The interesting thing about, I think in this context, humor has to be linked to a story. Mark Twain had a comment that if you dissect humor, it falls flat. Right. And so it's the unexpected surprise, but I think the reality is in the climate change issue, moral outrage doesn't work, facts doesn't work, and so we're really left by changing the metaphor, change the story, and the research shows that when people listen to a story, they, as they explained to me, you kind of do a Vulcan mind meld between the storyteller and the listener. So thank you all, and I'm encouraged.
So I think we're going to, I really want to thank our speakers, our panel. And I really congratulate the audience, all 9+ of you who stuck it out. Thank you very much, and enjoy your evening in New Orleans.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys for hosting.